Hello, and welcome to the Mississippi Valley Archaeology Center's UWL Archaeology Alumni Podcast. I'm MVAC archaeologist Cindy Kutchuk. Through this podcast series, we're connecting with alumni of the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse Archaeology program. We're getting perspectives on their experiences in the program and where life led them after graduation. We're exploring the impacts of an education in archaeology and hopefully hearing some interesting stories along the way. Our guest today is Sheila Oberreuter. She attended UWL from 2006 to 2010 and graduated with a BS in Archaeological Studies. Along the way, she was involved with MVAC as a work-study student, took the MVAC field school, and worked as a summer field and lab technician. She later went on to earn a master's in technology and analysis of archaeological materials from University College London in 2012. Now she works for Effigy Mounds National Monument. Welcome, Sheila.
Hi, Cindy. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So to start off, what led you to UWL's archaeology program? Did you have some experiences that led you there? What was the process like of choosing La Crosse?
I kind of came around it in a roundabout way. I had actually done some archaeology experience as a kid, as a middle school, high school student, and one of the other volunteers in those volunteer events had said, there's some good schools in Wisconsin, and I was like, okay, as a high schooler, knowing that I wanted to do that for college. And when I was in high school, I did have an opportunity to go to like a college fair where they have a bunch of booths. And I knew in the back of my head that person had said, there's some good schools in Wisconsin for archaeology. And so I went around the room and just tried to find, is there any Wisconsin schools here? And there's two. I don't remember what the other one was, but I went to that table and I was like, do you have an archaeology program? And they said no. And the one right next to that they had an archaeology program, and it was UW-La Crosse. So I kind of found it in a bit of a haphazard way, but I'm very, very glad I did. I really liked the program. The fact that I could study archaeology from the get-go rather than the traditional anthropology and then focusing on archaeology as a master's and beyond. So I really did like the structure of that program. Which is ultimately why I chose to go and pursue that one as my college undergrad. So it was kind of it was meant to be, I guess.
Yeah, how fortunate. What luck to have
Yeah.
that table sitting there right next to the first one you tried out.
Yeah.
So when you came to UWL, you got to focus on archaeology as a major.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of supplemented that? Did you do an anthropology minor, or what sort of other studies did you incorporate along with the major?
Yeah, I did the minor in anthropology, and a lot of those classes are cross-listed as both. So you could take a lot of the history classes as well. So taking a lot of those archaeology, anthropology, history classes was really a way to kind of get that fuller grasp on the different topics that you needed to know about. So I was really grateful for that. One of those things that I kind of wish I did more of was actually on the GIS end of it. I took one GIS class, Geographic Information Systems, but I wish I took more because that is such a cornerstone of archaeology anymore, is that mapping software. It's all the computer side of it as well as the fieldwork end of it. So I wish I had taken a little bit more of those classes because that it would have been really beneficial. But I'm glad I took the one at least. But those were the classes that I wound up taking. I've always loved history, so that was an easy choice to take and fill my schedule with all of those interesting history classes. So those were fun and always very informative.
Of course. And what kinds of history classes were you taking? Were they, ancient history or more like US history?
Yeah. I have always been a very practical person. So I remember looking at all of the really cool classes you could take about stuff all over the world. But I also knew that like most likely I'd get a job in North America. so I should probably know those types of history classes. So I think I mainly focused in the North American archaeology, Midwestern archaeology. I do remember that I took a couple of those, ancient Egyptian stuff, and I it was really informative, and I'm glad I took it, but I haven't used that in the same way that I've used all of the very practical um, archaeology of the stuff that's around me now. So I'm glad I did that. Maybe it would have been a little bit more fun to take some of those, ancient Near East history or something like that. But it all of those have played into how you view archaeology, though. You get a little bit of all of that in some of those main basic level classes as well. You do learn about stuff all over the world, which is one of the important things to come away with, knowing that we're not all that different. We're people all over the world, so we do a lot of very similar things, just depending on where we're at on the globe. So but I focused mainly on some of those archaeology and anthropology of the upper Midwest and North America.
And part of the program at UWL is you have to take a field school somewhere, whether that's abroad, whether it's here. Did you take the local UWL field school and get field experience in the local archaeology, or did you go somewhere else?
Yeah, I did the one locally. I knew that I wanted to take it as quick as I could, because then I would have the opportunity to try to work summer jobs in archaeology. So I took it at the first chance that I could, which was a field school in Onalaska, Wisconsin. I still drive by it sometimes and go, "Ooh, I know what's in that field." So that's really entertaining. But yeah, I took the local field school, and I had that opportunity to do archaeology before even going to college. So I knew a bit more of what I was getting into, and so that was easy for me to know that field school was going to be a good fit, and to know that that's, again, my very practical brain, knowing that those are the types of methodologies that I would most likely be employed in, is doing stuff in North America, and people excavate in different parts of the world in slightly different ways. So being able to know the techniques that I would need to succeed out of college and be able to get those jobs right away was really something that I had in the back of my mind that whole time going through school.
Oh yeah, and then what sort of opportunities did that open up then, taking that field school so early?
Mhm.
What sort of did that lead to after you had that field experience?
Yeah, I was able to then work the next 2 summers as a technician with UW with no, I got to get the acronym right here, because I have a UW or a MVAC and an MWAC. So let me try that again, because this is MVAC, not MWAC. I have a work
You
one
got
that's
it.
MWAC, and it throws me every time.
Oh yeah.
MVAC is this one. Yeah. So since I was able to do that field school so early, I was able to work those next 2 summers at MVAC as a field and lab technician. So they had another field school the next summer, so I was a TA for that field school, which was really a fascinating experience to be able to kind of teach archaeology with some of my friends. That was how I came up realizing that I actually really like ceramics, was that we would go around as the TA, we would go around and we weren't digging, we were helping the other students, answer questions and how do I do this style of paperwork and what is this weird thing I found in the ground. So we were answering those types of questions. And one of my friends, I would loop back to them apparently frequently enough and I would look at their box of artifacts that they had found, and my screen is going crazy. Okay, so I would loop around and talk to a certain friend of mine, and I would look in their box of artifacts that they had found, and I would apparently always pick up the ceramics and clean those ones off. And one of them mentions, "Sheila, I always like it when you come over because you always clean off our ceramics." And that was that light bulb moment of Oh, I guess I do really like the ceramics end of it. So I that led me to doing a lot of ceramic stuff after that field school. But being able to work as a student doing archaeology was very beneficial. You just got that hand-eye coordination of what you needed to do for field work. The artifact identification was really very helpful in knowing what you're looking at. And then after the field school, we actually processed all of those artifacts as well. So we were working doing all of the lab work as well, because not all of archaeology is field work. There's also a whole bunch of inside stuff too. So being able to have both of those skill sets was, again, something that I knew going into it was going to be really important to leave that program with that type of experience and knowledge. So that's something that I sought out as I was going through the program to try to learn both sides of that, so that I wasn't just a field person or just a lab person, but being able to balance both of those was something that I kept in mind.
Yeah, and was that something you felt drawn to too? Being able to teach people and pass on your knowledge? Was that something you sort of kept in mind as you were getting towards the end of your career at UWL, thinking about what you wanted to do? Or
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily thought about teaching, but it was a couple of those experiences interacting with other students where people would say like, "Oh, you explained that really well." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." Like that's I'm glad you get it now, you know. So that's actually one of those things that fast forward in time, working at a national park is actually really beneficial to be able to strip back the jargon and be able to explain those types of topics that could potentially be really complex for archaeology, but explain them in a way that makes sense to the everyday person and brings archaeology to the public in really interesting ways. So that's been one of those, in hindsight, oh, that was a really good thing that I've been able to have that experience as a student, and I started kind of doing that at an early stage in my career, and I've just kept doing it, which has been worked out pretty well for me, I guess.
yeah, certainly has. So backtracking a few steps,
Yeah.
what did you do after you graduated and before you wound up in Iowa at FG Mounds National Monument? There was a step where you went to grad school in there.
Yeah, there was two things that happened in that time, or probably more than two things. But um right away after graduating, I was pretty burnt out from school because it's a pretty intense program. I knew that going into it that it would be really intense, but I also knew that at a certain point I was going to want some time away from school. So I took a year off in between undergrad and graduate school. And I am so very glad that I did. I do not regret that in any way, shape, or form. I did a year in AmeriCorps with Habitat for Humanity. So I actually wound up building houses for 11 months, doing something totally different. And I am so glad I did. I would not exchange that for anything. That was a vital, just life experience to be able to do that. So that was really, really cool. And that actually gave me the time to kind of think about, what do I want to do for grad school? I knew I wanted to go, but I also knew that I didn't want to rush into that because grad school is a lot of work. It's a lot of money. It's a lot. And I didn't want to just pick a program because I needed to go to a program. I wanted to find something that was going to be a good fit and a have it be more of a passion project than like a requirement that I needed to do this. So I took that year as a way to kind of digest, what do I want to do? Where that's when it comes back to that field school memory of, hey, you always clean off our ceramics when you come check out our artifacts. And oh yeah, I do. I pick those up every single time. That's the first thing that I'll go for, is that, what's that piece of ceramic in your tray? So I did a program that focused more on ceramics and focused more on using techniques and analysis that we don't normally use in archaeology. So it was a program that I think had a lot of, in many ways, had a lot of similarities with the UWL program in that it wasn't as broad for general anthropology, but it was more specific. And that's what I liked about the UWL program. And this was a very similar grad program where you focused in on one thing. So I did ceramic petrology, which is a technique borrowed from geology, but using that on archaeological ceramics rather than just rocks, which is what geologists use it for. And it's to look at the different types of inclusions and temper that gets brought into the clay so that you can learn a bit more about how people were creating that. So not a standard program, but I think very, very beneficial for the future of archaeology.
Excellent. Sounds really interesting. And you went through University College London. Did you visit London at all? Did some of your work involve European ceramics, or were you working with ceramics from the US here?
I mainly was using stuff from Europe. It was a 1-year program. So some people that were in that program brought ceramics over with them. There was a student from Canada who brought ceramics with her because she was also associated with another university there. So people could bring those ceramics with them, or you could pick a project from around there. So my dissertation material wound up coming from a Roman site in Romania, where they had found this collapsed roof in the middle of what they knew was very occupied Roman territory, but also kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So they were like, why is this Roman building here? So looking at where did all those ceramics come from for the Roman army to build a building out in what seemed like the middle of nowhere. So it started getting at some of their settlement patterns, and were they shipping in those tiles for their roof from further away, or were they made on site? You can look at questions like that with that type of technique.
Cool. So from pottery and field school to roof tiles from a Roman
You never
building.
know.
Oh, great.
Yeah, you never know where archaeology
of how you start off somewhere and that leads you into a really different or a really interesting research focus that you hadn't expected.
Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, it fit so well with what I realized I was interested in going through school. So in a roundabout way, like it all makes sense in hindsight, but maybe at the time you don't know that it's the path you needed to be on.
Yeah, and so after you earned your master's, what was in store next?
Then a little bit of that reality of, I did the school, I did the additional school that you're supposed to do for archaeology. And I came back to the United States and, looking for jobs, trying to make that first kind of career move happen. It took a little while to have that. So I had about a year in there of just hodgepodge, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. A lot of also volunteering so that the job that I used to pay my bills had nothing to do with archaeology, but in order to keep something on my resume that was still relevant, I was volunteering at a variety of historic houses in the area, with the state archaeology offices as well, and started to do a bit of field work with them as they've had projects come up. So that's kind of how you have to make it work for those really early years after you leave school, of trying to kind of glue anything together that you can to make a dent and kind of get your foot in the door somewhere. So there was quite a bit of that. And as a roundabout way of knowing somebody that did this program and then somebody that did that, through some of those networking opportunities that come with working a whole bunch of random jobs in all sorts of places, I wound up doing a quasi internship or volunteer experience with the Virgin Islands National Park. They had a field school that came down to the Virgin Islands during January. They came from Wisconsin and they were delayed by a blizzard and started an excavation because it was a field school, but then they only had a week. And so then all the students went home and the park was left with a half open excavation unit. So we had to, they were then just looking for anybody that could come down at the drop of a hat and continue this excavation that had been started with this field school. So I knew somebody else that had done that, and through a random Facebook post was like, well, I could probably, throw my hat in there. So I sent my resume off, and a couple weeks later I was buying a plane ticket to the Caribbean in February and wound up staying down there for about 6 months. So you just don't know where you're going to wind up.
Oh, amazing. And what was the archaeology like down there? Like you go from Wisconsin to London, Romanian tiles, and to the Virgin Islands.
It was it kind of goes back to the idea that like we're all human. We all have very similar things. People were making ceramics, they were making stone tools. And once you know how to identify those in one area, you know how to identify them in other areas. I couldn't tell you what typology those Taino pieces of pottery were, but we found a lot of really cool stuff. But then stuff that I've never found before, like things made of coral. We don't have that in the Midwest. So there's definitely some things that were very new to see in archaeology, but also a lot of similarities. The fish bone you're going to find at sites in Wisconsin, still going to be some fish bone on an island in the Caribbean. So knowing how to identify those types of things, even in a very broad way, you can use that and apply it to cultures anywhere. So it was not anything I had been prepared for. I had never studied that area or knew anything about it before going down there, but it's something that you can kind of pick up and learn when you're there.
What an experience. And now you're at Effigy Mounds National Monument at one of our national parks. So how did you get into that, and sort of what kind of work are you doing there now? What sorts of things can you share with us about that?
Yeah. So from the Virgin Islands, I was applying to other National Park Service jobs because I thought this is pretty cool. And it takes a little while in a similar way for the private sector. It takes a little while to get into the Park Service. So you wind up applying for a lot of jobs and never hearing back about a lot of them. And every once in a while you'll get somebody that they still need people, or they still are trying to find people to fit into the schedules and stuff. So I was able to get a job at Effigy Mounds actually in interpretation first. So they were going to be closing the campground for hurricane season. So I needed to find another avenue of employment. So they were closing down where I was living in the Virgin Islands. And I needed to find something else. So luckily the park had an opening in interpretation that it was to finish up another person's season. So it was just going to be for 3 months. Lo and behold, I've been there for about 10 years now. So that 3 months has just kind of been one of those, oh, can you still do this? Or, oh, can you stay on and work a couple more months in this way? So I was able to start in interpretation. And then the next season when I was there, I applied for the archaeology technician job, which was a summer seasonal. So I was able to kind of slide into that role because I had a little bit of that experience in interpretation. And that's where talking to people about archaeology of the upper Mississippi River Valley was pretty much what I went to school for. That I'm literally right down the river now at Effigy Mounds, and La Crosse is an hour away. So I knew all of the archaeology of the area, which was really a beneficial thing to have somebody be able to come on and talk about right away. So that it's you never know where you're going to wind up. It's not a place that I anticipated being, but I'm very glad I'm there. So after flip-flopping back and forth from interpretation and archaeology technician, they were going to hire a museum technician as a permanent. So I applied for that job and was able to get that. So as a museum technician, they have a big collection that's archaeology based because the park has been viewed in that way for a really long time. So having a museum person who knows the archaeology end of it and can do that identification is kind of a nice thing when you have that type of collection. So I've had to learn a lot about other things that I've never thought about, like entomology specimens and pressed plants. So they have a variety of things in that collection that I have to learn about, because that's not something that I know about from archaeology. But you can still learn those things and learn those new areas and new avenues as you go through a career like that. So taking care of the collections, we do a annual inventory every year. We have researchers that come in and do stuff where we need to collect their documentations and their data, and if they collect any objects. So it's a lot of record keeping and keeping track of various projects, a lot of moving parts at some points in time throughout the year, a lot of research as well. We've been going through different NAGPRA processes, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So we've been trying to make some headway in what the park needs to do to fulfill the requirements of that law. So that's one of the bigger projects that I've worked on in the past few years, as we've tried to transition and work through some of the things that we've needed to do for a while. So it's a little bit of everything, essentially, a little bit of everything.
All important though.
Yeah, yeah.
So kind of looking back and from where you started at UWL, what sort of things have you pulled from your experiences as a student and working with MVAC into what you do now? Or like what sorts of things like GIS do you wish you would have been able to do a bit more of as you were studying?
I think one of those things that I'm really glad I did when I was at UWL was the work study program. So being able to start first semester freshman year looking at artifacts and being able to see them in the lab, even if it's in small increments. I was grateful that I had a work study, but other people can come in and do that as a volunteer basis. I'm really glad I took advantage of that, because you got that experience in all of those lab methods. And it wasn't just one class. You can take that class as lab methods and come out with a little bit of experience, but when you've did it for 4 years, that makes a huge difference in how you can look at something then in a museum collection somewhere else and go, oh, I know what this is and I know what we need to do with it, because I had been able to see that whole process for 4 years. So instead of just a 1 semester class. So I'm really glad that I had that opportunity to be able to have that. That is probably one of those things that I use most often, or the skills that I learned during that work study for that artifact identification. We did a lot of rebagging, because some of the plastic bags had been there since the 70s, so they were starting to deteriorate. So seeing that plastic deteriorate and trying to keep the context the same as we rebag those artifacts for better preservation. We do a lot of that on the museum side as well, trying to keep those storage containers in their best condition possible. So those are all things that I don't know if you fully grasp that in a 1 semester class, but it's that constant, oh, here's what we did for this whole semester project for this entire year. So it was really, that was one of the really good things I'm glad I took advantage of.
And you don't just learn a topic or a skill, you get to really develop it and ask questions of professors or supervisors and figure out kind of more of the nuances.
Yeah, and it sinks in too. You hear about that in class, that like, oh, your storage containers will slowly degrade with time and you need to change those out. Well, we did a whole bunch of that. We did boxes and boxes and boxes. So it is seared into my brain how that plastic gets yellow over time. And now you see it and you see those paper clips or you see those staples and you're like, oh yeah, I gotta take that out. Where's my staple remover? So being able to see that process through time was actually really, really beneficial, I think.
We focused a lot on careers and how taking archaeology into professional life. Are there any more general life skills that you learned while you were at UWL and working at MVAC? Sort of some things that you pull into other areas of life?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One of the things that I find myself realizing is a way that I just think now is being able to think from another person's perspective. So when you're studying a different culture, you're studying a different culture and you have to realize that you bring some biases to the table with how, we expect our life to be a certain way. But when you're studying somebody's culture that lived 2000 years ago, life was very different. They didn't have the things that we have now. So you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes and figure out how they survived, how they lived in the landscape, how did they do things, or why did they do things. And in the current world that we live in now, modern day time, I feel like that is something that is missing a lot. People don't necessarily see things from other people's perspectives very easily or very well. It's often a thing that I find I try to explain to friends when we're having various conversations that, you're seeing it from one perspective, but that's not how somebody else is going to see that same topic. So I think that anthropology background really helped kind of shape just how I actually interpret, daily topics and news that that comes at us today. So I think that is just one of those things that we maybe need a bit more of, being able to see things from somebody else's perspective and being able to look at other cultures from all over the world was one of those things that just because they do it different doesn't mean that that's wrong. It's just not the way that we might do it today. And that's not a bad thing. It's giving everybody a little bit of grace. So it's one of those things that I think has definitely played into how I view the world. And I trace that back to my undergrad and my education of archaeology and anthropology.
How great to bring that forward into your everyday life and
Mm-hmm.
have that keep enriching you as you go
Yeah.
along. Excellent. Um, are there any recommendations you have for current or prospective students who are kind of in the boat you were in a
Mm-hmm.
while ago?
Yeah. I think current students or prospective students, I think one of the things that has benefited how I look at things in terms of archaeology is one of my passions became ceramics. And I was able to take ceramic classes, like ceramic art classes. And I actually think that that's one of the ways that I started my interest in that was actually a high school ceramics class. And when you're really interested in a specific material type or object type, I think it's really beneficial to get your hands dirty and do that yourself and learn how to do how do you make a pot? How do you flint knap? How do you do all of these things that we might find archaeologically? Or if you're interested in that, if people were woodworking, do some of that. I think that's one of the ways that um, I have found that I can see things on the ceramics that other people might not because I've made that mistake before, or I've done that before, or I fixed it that way before, or it gives you that very tactile, hands-on way to see those objects and to see some of that humanity in those objects, to remember that on the other side of that, 2000 years ago is a person and they were doing the same things that you're doing today. So I think that that's a really great way to kind of really grasp very different objects that we find archaeologically is to give it a go, give it a try it out yourself, because you will definitely learn something, and then you will also appreciate the hard work that went into making the thing, because you can make a pot as a kid, as a little pinch pot. You can try to do that, but then try to make it big, try to make it practical, try to bring that into the daily life of that's how you cook your food. You need to make that pot so that you can cook. You need to do this thing so that you can survive. And we don't have to have those types of analyses going on in our own head. So it's an interesting way to think about the objects that we find, and to remember that there's a person behind it as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that advice and the rest you shared with us today. Wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for
It's
being
been
on.
wonderful to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you again. And thank you for listening. If you want to find out more about archaeology, especially in the upper Midwest, and do some exploring yourself, you can visit the MVAC website at uwlax.edu/MVAC. We have plenty of pages and information, resources that can lead you to other places like national parks and other countries there. But you can learn a lot about the Midwest and start your exploration. Thanks again.